Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Thriving Talk. And today there is a little bit of a change. I don't have Tim with me. And as far as I can think, this is the 52nd episode. And all 51 episodes, I think it has been me who has been answering the questions which Tim or someone else will ask me. But I'm so glad that today I don't have to do that because we have Pastor Billy Anger with us. And he's visiting us and he is ministering in meetings going on in the church. And so I thought I will use this time to actually ask him some questions from the areas or from the field where he has expertise so that it will be very beneficial for everyone. So before I introduce him or I give him a chance to introduce himself, Tim is not gone anywhere. He is behind the camera, so he is still here. But I think I will be taking this opportunity to simply sit and ask questions. Before we start, I want to just a reminder that Thriving Talk is available in all major platforms like iTunes, Google Podcast, Spotify, YouTube, and all those places. So if you have not subscribed, feel free to subscribe. And you will be really blessed by the conversations which happens here, which is ultimately aimed to help people thrive spiritually, morally, in all areas, all aspects of life. So may God bless you. Without any more delay, I want to go forward. And today, the focus is going to be on current cultural challenges. But before getting into that, Pastor Billy, I would like you to give a small introduction to our audience. Where are you from? What have you been doing with your life so far? And what are you doing these days, right? So if you could give a small introduction, that would be great.
Glad to do that. The majority of my life is behind me. I'm 53 years of age, but I have been in the ministries, I suppose, really beginning when I was 15 or 16 years of age. I attended a church that was always looking for someone to volunteer, and any place that I saw a void, I tried to plug in and be a help and an assistant to the pastor in that particular congregation. What do? I've traveled for I don't know how many different years now, I guess 20 altogether. I began itinerant ministry when I was 25 years of age, and my wife and I lived in a travel trailer. And we zigzagged all across the United States. Our kids were in tow, and we preached old-time revival meetings. And I think we hit, if I'm not mistaken, about 34 different states altogether, averaging about 250 to 270 services a year.
Wow.
But back in 2005, my children came of age, and I felt like it was time for them to have some stability in a home setting. And I left the evangelistic field. I pastored for 17 years. And as I said last night, I hated absolutely every minute of it simply because it's not what I was purposed to do. God did not call me to pastor. And about 4 years ago, I felt God basically just sitting down on my lap. To be quite honest with you, God has a way of interrupting our schedule. And if we are deaf to what he has for us, I think he'll gently push us to begin with, but if we are disobedient and unresponsive, he has a way of applying greater pressure, and he sat on my lap, as it were, and I saw some things that really troubled me, and as the result of that, I am back out doing itinerant work, specifically in the field of Christian apologetics.
Great. Just a follow-up question. When you said, when you were traveling for years doing revival meetings, were your family traveling along with you, or it's just that you are missing from household?
It was a scenario of both. When I first began in 1995, we bought a 37-foot wilderness travel trailer.
Okay.
And so the kids were 7, 5, and 3 years of age, and we lived in that travel trailer. It was our only residence for about 2.5 years.
Okay, so 2.5 years you were just in the trailer going
That's
from
all
place.
we had.
So how do they go to school then?
They were homeschooled. My wife had the responsibility of homeschooling, and then, of course, keeping house and feeding us and taking care of the laundry while I was pretty much absorbed with ministry work.
Okay, that's
Good
interesting.
woman.
Yeah, I've never heard somebody who has done that. Normally
Yes.
preachers would travel, come back, but this is like you are going from one place to.
It's all we had, all
And-
we knew.
and
We were
I'm-
thoroughly dedicated to the
I'm not
cause.
sure why you never ended up coming to Minnesota in this.
Don't know.
So anyway, it's fascinating, how God has taken you from that, and then you are pastoring. I can understand pastoral ministry is not easy, it's tough, but then on top of that, you're calling.
Yes, I tip my hat to pastors that do their job well. Far too many of them are lax in their assignment. And I really believe, Pastor, that is one of the reasons why the church in America is struggling as much as it is. I understand that pastors become discouraged. I understand that they burn out. Nonetheless, we're not working for the here and now. We're working for the hereafter. And when we come to ministry with that kind of eternal perspective, I think that provides us the strength and the encouragement that we desperately need at times just to continue on and forge forward.
Great. Yep. Okay. So let's move forward. So now you travel and minister in universities, in campuses, right? So what are the main challenges you're seeing? Because you said you are now being entrusted this responsibility by the Lord. So what are the main challenges you see as you minister to the current generation?
Yeah, I think the current generation has been sold a bill of goods that does not produce the product that it was promised. Our kids for the past decades have been fed this philosophy of postmodernism. What works for you may not necessarily work for me. What is true for you may not necessarily be true for me. And of course, those are all philosophical fallacies. But I think at the end of the day, it's left a generation with despondency. There's little hope for the future, and that comes from a lack of purpose, a lack of meaning. If you exclude God from the conversation, and man is nothing but a product of cellular and molecular activity, then at the end of the day, nothing really matters. There is no criteria. There is no standard or basis by which life has any meaning. And that's one of the problems I see with so many kids in university. Atheistic thinking, atheistic teaching has led to a place of, again, just despondency and a lack of hope.
So how do you go to these places? Are you invited to go and somebody arranges something, or you just go and have interactions? How do you really do this?
Well, it's interesting you asked that question because primarily campus ministry is through various invitations. Now, I have been known to just walk on campus and engage conversations on the sidewalk, which I do. I enjoy those spontaneous kinds of moments, but I work with other parachurch organizations that have a campus presence, and typically it's through their invitation that I go and speak to a larger group of students. But again, I don't think that if the call of God is there to speak to a generation, we should necessarily allow the obstacle of a formal invitation to keep us from going and doing what it is that God is propelling us to do.
Yes. So that's absolutely correct. So when you talk to these students, what is the response normally? Like, are they receptive to what you have to say, or they come from a different point of view? Because I have seen some videos of people who do similar things, and it may not be university, but maybe on the streets or other places, and then there are some people who actually come and oppose them very strongly and say a lot of mean things, So what has been your experience? What do you see? Is the trend changing? Do you see more intolerance along the way, or what do you think?
Well, the first thing I would say, and strangely enough, this isn't necessarily a philosophical response, I believe that first and foremost, if you treat people like they have value and you engage them like you truly want to have a conversation and you're concerned about what they think and you have an interest in their opinion, your success in that conversation is far more likely. So I would say, first and foremost, you've got to go in with an attitude of sincerity. Much of the time, these young adults really don't know what they believe. They have belief systems that are in place, but they don't know why they believe it. And they are easily convinced to the other viewpoint if you can offer them logical and concrete responses that would tend to disagree with their worldview and their opinions. They are very pliable, I'm finding. I mean, very malleable. They will listen to what you have to say, and they will engage that conversation. Again, if you're coming from an attitude of sincerity and you're genuine.
Great. So sincerity and genuinity is absolutely important when we have these conversations.
And I think that was the model Jesus had with those that he engaged.
Okay. So shifting a little bit from the university or campus, because we are part of a larger culture, right? And what do you think are the main challenges, which is, of course, these universities or these institutions are the ones who is propagating a lot of those things. It comes, when I say that, it has a major role to play. But in general, what do you see as some of the main challenges with the current culture?
Yeah, I think our culture is in conflict perhaps as never before. And anytime a culture finds itself in this kind of contentious atmosphere, the first thing you look at, in my estimation, is communications. How do we communicate with one another? So oftentimes I think that we focus on the symptoms rather than communicating our core beliefs. And in American culture especially, you have communication breakdowns generationally. You have communication breakdowns culturally. And until we begin to learn how to listen and respect each other's opinion, we're going to find ourselves at this stalemate culturally. Everybody's got a right to an opinion. Everybody's got a right to a different viewpoint. But we will never accomplish, we will never forge forward if we're not willing to listen to one another. And I think this is a systematic problem. This is a pathology that we've got to address.
So I want to get to the little bit more detail, like maybe a little bit specifics here. So today we have, like, this country is multicultural. Like the Twin Cities where we live, what I heard is probably 110 nationalities, more than 100 nationalities. People from different nations live here. And everybody brings their own set of cultural values and religious belief systems. And there are, all these things comes in, right?
Absolutely.
And now I can understand that the folks who have come as first generation, they may still be holding on to the values and systems they had back in home, but as the new generation emerges, like the kids who are born here, the children who have, for them this is their country where they grew up. But of course they are in a conflicting position because they have their parents or their back home, their culture, and then they are exposed to these new things which they are getting. So sometimes it can be a challenging. So there was somebody who wrote a book which was called as, especially focusing on Indians, it's called as a coconut generation, because outside they look different, but inside they are more Americanized, right?
Yeah.
So my question is, when you interact with students, because I know that you interact with international students, you interact with students probably who are not who are not Americans in the sense like born here, maybe came later, or even who grew up in households where parents came from other countries. Do you see that this issues with whatever is happening exists with those also, or is it more with, for a lack of better term, let me say this, people who are here for a long time, who have been like part of the culture, is that shifting there, or do you see more resistance from immigrants? Yeah. Or you get what I'm trying
Absolutely.
to... Yeah.
Well, I find that immigrants are far more tolerant of various worldviews. Regrettably, I think that there's a lack of tolerance in American generations to the third, fourth, fifth generation, whatever the case.
Yeah.
And when it comes to the cultural breakdown and the lack of communication, I don't think we can have this conversation and be honest in the assessment if we don't talk about tolerance. There's a lack of appreciation for diversity. Either you do things my way, you adopt my way, or leave me alone, we're going to cancel you. And of course, cancel culture is a completely different subject and yet ties into this subject very much. And tolerance can't be misunderstood as passivity or indifference. I'm not indifferent toward my Christian viewpoint. I am not passive in sharing my Christian faith. At the same time, I cannot go in, like the old adage says, a bull in a china shop, and just force my Christian view on those that are agnostic, those that are atheistic, those that come from a Hindu or Buddhist background. And if we don't listen to one another, if we don't have an attitude of tolerance toward other people's perspectives, we'll never embark on stage number 2 of the conversation. But that tolerance, again, it's not disingenuous. I truly want to know why people believe what they believe, how they've arrived at that conclusion, because I think it's disrespectful to just, again, push forward with a total disregard for those that have been raised with a different viewpoint.
Yeah. So that's very interesting because the reason I asked is maybe this has got to do with postmodernism too. What works for me works for me. It may not work for you, and I don't care about that. And so the thing which I see a lot of times is one of the challenges is that this whole freedom, diversity, tolerance, all these things, right? When it is not taken in the right context or in the right view, I think that can lead to a lot of challenges. I will give you one example is sometimes I just say, sometimes it's not like, don't misunderstand me. I'm not saying, I'm not advocating for that. But sometimes I feel like freedom not in the right context is what has destroyed a lot of things.
Right.
When I say that, what I mean by that is, for example, sometimes I say, even in churches, I say, when I compare with churches which existed maybe 100 years ago, which I know of, there were more disciplined, there was less challenging to the authority and all. I thought things functioned in a different way, in a good sense, compared to nowadays where everybody has an opinion.
Right.
And as a pastor, if you don't agree. So for a classic example, I know I'm a little diverting from the topic, but I want to make a point here. Let's say somebody says we are going to have the church decides we're going to change our carpets. And somebody says it should be the red, and somebody says, no, we need green, and somebody says it should be brown, and somebody says the color should be such something. And people can leave the church because of that simple thing, right?
Right.
And same way that freedom has brought this entitlement mentality where everybody says, what I say is the right thing. Everybody thinks that that's the way it should be. And what is your view on that? I'm not against freedom or anything, but I'm saying when our choices were less, right? But now we have so many choices, and that has just brought some challenges along with it.
Well, I think of Lady Liberty, sitting there in New York Harbor. At the base of that statue, it says, out of many, one. And we've got to understand that there's a difference between unity and uniformity. Uniformity is that everybody does, says, acts, and looks the same. And therein, once again, is the need for tolerance, because we know reality tells us that's not the case. You mentioned the word freedom. I think freedom is a terribly misunderstood topic. Freedom does not give me the latitude to do and say anything that I want to do or say. Freedom, first of all, it comes with a price, but that price also means exercising balance, not only desiring respect for oneself, but also respecting the other individual. And these principles, American exceptionalism, which I sort of subscribe to, will not continue to flourish if we disregard the attitudes of our founding fathers. They gave room to grow. They gave room for individualism, for individual expression. And this attitude of be complicit, comply to what I say, what I want, is what's leading, I think, so many Americans to violent crimes and situations and demonstrations of violence in the streets of America.
Yeah, that's right. Because from where we are sitting, I think there were stores completely demolished or ransacked.
And there's an anger out there. You know, if I disagree with you, Pastor, what does it say about me if I just ignore you? That is to say, I cancel you. That is to say that you don't even have the value of a human being. You don't even possess the basic dignity of a human being. And to me, it's the most egregious slight. It is the most egregious insult that one can pay another human being. And so we discontinue conversations, we discontinue relationships, and those kinds of things only contribute to, as we are well saying, the breakdown of a society.
Okay, so shifting a little bit, yesterday when you were speaking, in your presentation, you mentioned about how you were burdened, and when you did the research, you found that Barna, Lifeway, and other research firms have come up with this number of 75% of Christians between the age 18 to 29 leaving the church, and only one come back maybe later at some point. Can you elaborate a little bit more on that?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
In fact, that's the reason I went back on the road. I was pastoring, even though I was incredibly dissatisfied with my ministry vocation. I had become comfortable. I had become sedentary. I enjoyed living in my home, sleeping in my bed every night, going to my refrigerator every morning. And so I allowed that comfort to lead me into a state of complacency. But several events took place, including what you're referencing now. I saw some reports published by Lifeway, by Ratio Christi, by Barna, I think by Pew Research Council as well. And when you read and you cross-reference and discover that these statistics are in fact accurately representative of what's taking place, it should jar every Christian from our indifference, from our sensibilities need to be awakened. 3 out of every 4 self-identified Christian youth in this nation between the ages of 18 and 29 are abandoning the Christian faith upon graduation from high school, moving into their university education. And even more recently, I have read reports saying that the breakdown of the Christian faith in the American youth really is beginning before 18 years of age. It's now starting at their freshman and sophomore years of high school.
13, some things I found is 13 to 17 is now the critical time because things have come down.
Right.
Yeah, that's why in ICPF, one of the programs we are trying to bring the age down.
Absolutely.
So that we can, because by that time it's too late.
I think you're right. And that's what I'm seeing as well. Of course, we've heard of the 1885 window. I'm sorry, the 1585 window where 85% of all people that come to faith in Christ do so before their 15th birthday. And we need to be cognizant of that fact. But again, I'm glad you brought that up because yes, I am seeing that the deconstruction of faith is beginning even now before the 18th birthday.
Yeah, I want to add one thing to this, even though I was not planning to. So I served in the leadership role for Sunday school committee or the team for my church organization.
Right.
Not for the church, but for organization. I was director of that for years, and then I was in the team. One of the challenges I want to just mention here. So when we were back in India, the Sunday school curriculums were very different than what's here. In the sense like if somebody properly does Sunday school from grade 1 all the way to 12th, they actually are equivalent to a bachelor's degree of theology or biblical studies. Right. So recently, this year, back there, the organization I am, with, they actually gave certificate. There was a graduation service for all the students who completed 12 years and cleared all the exams, right? Now, why I'm bringing that up? So when I was working with different churches and we were trying to bring one curriculum, because some churches even didn't have a Sunday school curriculum, so we were trying. So one challenge I found is, a lot of times here, people want to make it very easy for children, right? They want to go with the most light curriculum.
Right.
So when I was doing it, I found that those curriculums were they say we need to teach our children practical aspects, but it's so practical that they don't have any theological foundation or any biblical foundation.
Right.
So then I also found people who came from different context. Maybe they went through the Sunday school back home or things like that. Those people actually wanted a little bit more tougher curriculum for the children. So we could never reconcile that because, and it's the same thing. Some people will not participate in your centralized program because they will say, oh, no, this is too hard. And some will say, this is too easy. We want more things to be there. Right. So one thing I found out is the biblical literacy among children has been really impacted. And I know of some churches and some places where they have taken real effort. I know of one big church in California where they don't have like Sunday school for 30, 45 minutes or something like that. They do all the services in the morning, and it's evening. It's for the students or the children to come, and they teach proper theological subjects,
right.
Like it's a 1 or 2 hour program. The reason I say that is because I know cultures where before kids go to their schools, they have to go to the religious place and learn for 1 hour their religious studies before they go.
Right.
And here, we spend I'm talking about generally, 30 or 40 minutes on a Sunday school. And there also people want to just to be the simplest thing possible. Recently I was talking to my son and about something, and he was telling, see, every year the same thing repeats, David. And when the Christmas time comes, it's all about Christmas. When the Easter comes, it's all about... And the intent is good that, they want to make it tough as, the age. But there is no solid... I'm not painting a broad brush, but I'm saying that's a challenge I found. And then the challenge on top of that, it's not the children's challenge.
Right.
What I found is parents, the Sunday school responsible people, they don't want to make sure that the children are learning things in the right. What do you have any experience or thought to share? Because I found that as a real challenge, because if we don't teach our children, like recently I've been doing a study with my own kids about how can we trust the Bible.
Yeah, right.
Where we go into the translations, the versions, the copies of copies, the manuscripts, everything.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm not trying to say that I do that, but the thing is, those things, majority of our children have no clue. And when you walk into a university and an atheist or some professor meets them and says, hey, why do you have different versions of your Bible?
Right.
And there are mistakes in the Bible.
Sure.
There are, 1,800 words, but there are this many thousand variants, variations.
Right.
What do you think?
Well, you've mentioned so many different things. Let me go back just a few moments ago to the statement that you made. You said we want our kids to understand the practicality of the scriptures. And I think even there is where we're starting to veer off course. I find that a lot of times when trying to make the Bible a practical book, we go into what is called topical studies as opposed to exegetical studies. Yep. You can't learn the Bible by studying topics. You have to learn the Bible verse by verse exegetically. And because to me, it's not a matter of teaching our kids the practicality of the Bible. Our job is to teach the kids the scriptures so that they can make application in their lives. To me, there's a difference between application and practicality. The application is practical, but that comes only from the understanding of what Scripture teaches. Furthermore, and you've mentioned this, and I say the same thing, and I guess it's a matter of semantics. I've been around you long enough to know that there's a difference to me between teaching and training. Mm-hmm. The Bible says, train up your child. And there's again, you can teach your kids, but you've got to go further. You have to exercise discipline in front of them. You need to show them Christianity in action, how Christianity works, how it's applied to my life each and every day on a practical level. So therein lies one of the great challenges that we have in American Christianity. And there can be no mistake in my mind that 40 million people in the last 30 years have left the Christian faith in this country. 40 million people in 30 years. Why? Well, Barna says, our nation has never been more biblically illiterate. This is a matter of cause and effect. Our people don't know the Bible. They don't know the Bible because, quite frankly, they don't care to know. They're glad to be satiated on Sunday morning with a 60-minute sermon. They don't dig out truth for themselves. And what one generation embraces, the next generation takes to excess. We tell our kids on Sunday it's perfectly permissible to skip church for Little League Baseball. What are we telling our kids? What message are we sending them? We're showing them by our behavior, by our actions, that Christ is secondary to all other things. He becomes a matter of convenience, and if it fits the schedule, you can plug Christ in, but if necessary, you can unplug him and resume your activities next week.
That's right. I always say one thing, right? Don't outsource your kids' spirituality to someone else. And also, don't expect them to be anywhere higher than your level of spirituality because that's what they're learning, right?
Right, absolutely.
Yeah, and bad examples are definitely a problem because I know a pastor back in India, he was very strict in many sense, right? Spiritual matters. So in that culture, when somebody is traveling or something, the pastor goes and pray for them.
Right.
But if somebody is planning a trip or something and if they're traveling on Sunday, he won't go. Right. He's very clear.
Yeah.
He says, if you feel like your travel is more important than the church,
right,
I am not going to come and pray for you. Right. It's like he was like, today's culture, that may sound like crazy, right?
Yeah, right.
But that's what he followed. But today, as you said, for sports, some silly things.
Yeah, right.
For a birthday party or some friend call for something. I think that's where I feel like witness is also impacted because my friend calls me for a simple reason and I say, okay, I'm missing my church and coming and enjoying with you rather than saying, I have my church.
Right.
I have to be in the house of the Lord. Maybe I can come after the service or later. But if we are willing to miss Sunday service even for a silly matter, and some people may say, oh, that's the way of witnessing. But the thing is, the message you are giving to them is, for you, the spirituality doesn't matter.
Right, yeah.
But I've seen people from other faith backgrounds who will not compromise on these things.
Right.
So I think that has impacted.
That was one of the struggles that I had as a pastor. I would have parishioners call me. One example really rings true in my mind right now. One lady picks up the phone, calls me at, I guess, 4:30, 5 o'clock in the morning. And of course, she's got herself in a very distressed voice, and she says, Pastor, I need you to pray for me. I need you to pray for me. I have a headache. And my response was, take an aspirin. Now, that may seem to be somewhat incredulous, but the reason I responded that way was because this particular person came to church when it was convenient, would call and say, I can't attend, I am sick, but I come to discover that afternoon they're out shopping at Walmart. It's a matter of priority. And again, I had a rough time pastoring Americans because of that indifference that was shown week in and week out, a matter of convenience.
Yeah, that's...
Needless to say, they left the church.
That's always...
I'm not necessarily giving that as pastoral advice.
No, I know.
That was a struggle that I had.
Yeah, I know of a church where, as years progress, this is what happened. So when they saw that Sunday morning, people are busy with games, other things. So they started service on Saturday. And then later discovered that even Saturday people are busy. So they started a service on Friday.
Yeah.
So then they realized that weekends are the times when people travel and
Yeah.
they go to cabins or whatever it is. So then they started a service on Thursday.
Yeah.
Right? So from Sunday to Saturday. So now I'm thinking online makes it perfect because,
Right.
hey, we did this service whenever you feel like
Right.
watching,
making all
attending it.
kinds of accommodations.
Yeah.
We really are. And
Yeah.
everything should revolve around worship and living for God as opposed to the juxtaposition God has to fit into our schedule.
Yeah, and I think that has impacted, what this figures, numbers we are talking about. I don't think it will get better just by saying, but I think there needs to be more adjustments which needs to happen, or
I
more
absolutely
commitment.
believe that, right.
If He's our Lord, He's our Master, we need to make sure that, He
And
does.
I'm not even sure that it doesn't begin with bad theology, bad teaching, Lord and Master, and the whole argument. We won't travel down this road,
Yep.
but the whole saviorship as opposed to lordship, salvation. What does Christ really demand of us to be called His child? What does it really mean to be a Christian? Just to merely engage the benefits of Christianity? A lot of people want Christianity as fire insurance.
Yeah.
And they really don't want to be
Yep.
put everything down, come and follow me.
Yeah. So I have one more question to ask you. But before that, let me just say that when I said that, right? So the problem is, Jesus said you can't have two masters. You only have one, right? You either serve money or you serve God or you serve,
Right.
So, but I think when our priorities are not aligned with God, and when our life is not revolving, like Jesus is that old picture we have seen, right? Jesus is sitting at the throne of our life. If that's not happening, I think the whole point of me coming and singing, "You are my Lord," or all those things is kind of fake in my view.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So now we have said enough about problems, and we did discuss a little bit about how the churches are there. Now my question is, how do churches tackle this? Or let's leave alone the church. Maybe church is a good one. How do families, people who really want to, get better with this and want to see a generation who will serve the Lord? What are some simple, practical tips or steps we can take to tackle this issue?
When something's broke, I think you go back to the manual. And that would be my simple response. The early church would come together, assembling on the first day of the week. Of course, in those days, we know they did not gather in physical buildings outside the domicile, the family residence. They would come together, they would sing, they would pray, they would each share a word, getting back to the basics. I don't think that we need another manual, another religious guru, another conference. Just get back to what the instructions laid before us in the epistles say. I might be accused of giving an overly simplistic answer, but sometimes, Occam's razor, the simplest answer is the right answer. Let's just get back to what the New Testament teaches.
Yeah, the challenge in today's generation is people make money for making things complicated.
Right, yeah.
I work in the marketplace. I can tell you that people make money to make simple things complicated, right? And then they will make money to make those things simplified.
Right, absolutely.
But that has, I think, somehow... and then the big... one more challenge I want to just mention. I don't know whether you have noticed this. There is a consistent quest for change. Mm-hmm. Because people somehow think that if something is consistent, it's legacy, it's old.
Right.
Even though it is working.
Yeah.
But people want, it's a problem with the generation. Like, you have iPhone 14, but when 15 comes, you want 15 because it's the latest and the greatest. It's a change.
Right, yeah.
And you have this consistent desire to have the latest and the greatest, and that has impacted a lot of places. Sometimes I ask people this question, what is broken that we are trying to fix?
Right.
Nothing is broken in the first place.
Absolutely, yeah.
But people feel like if something has been consistent for a little bit, that's a problem. We need to make some changes because... And That's what happening in a lot of places.
Well,
And
that
I
goes
think,
to the void of the human
Yeah.
heart. If the human spirit isn't filled with the presence of God, it will never be satisfied with life. Therefore, it's got to move from one gimmick to the next fad to the newest program, all in an effort to fill when only God can fill.
Yeah. So the summary, I think, is to come to the basics. Don't ignore the basics, the fundamental, simple things, and try to go after the complicated. Because
Yeah, you don't change what works. We're not going to change the formula for water and try to find a new kind of water.
No, they came up with what is called as new types of water, right?
Yeah, but it's still 2 parts hydrogen, 1 part oxygen.
Yeah, you go to the shop and you see this type of water, that type of water. This gives you a little bit more of this.
Right.
So
Yeah.
same thing with
Right.
sometimes spirituality too. People are trying to do it, but you're right. And then later, actually, with all this energy drink and everything, later some research will come and say, oh, because of that,
Yeah,
it
right.
can cause this disease.
Right. And now we've just made more
yeah,
complicated.
every time something new comes, I think now I am of a viewpoint that wait and see what happens with
Right,
this,
yeah.
right? And I think that's why we have spiritual diseases. spiritual
Absolutely,
problems.
and I think one of the things also that's affecting our society is the fact that we're buying into the lie of greed. We need more. It's excess. I've often said that advertisers are one of the worst enemies to the overall wellness of the American general public, because advertisers do one thing: they convince people to buy things they don't need with money they don't have, and quickly we become, as the Scripture says, the debtor is enslaved to the creditor. And before long, we're living to pay the creditor, and God gets shelved in the process.
Okay, so the topic for this episode was current culture challenges. And thank you, Pastor Billy, for
My
your
pleasure.
thoughts. Any final thoughts before I conclude this episode?
Minnesota's beautiful.
That's
And
good.
the people in Minnesota are extremely gracious and kind. Yes. And I've never had so much Indian food in my life, but I really, really like it.
Thank you. With that, I will have one more episode with Pastor Billy Anger, because yesterday when he was speaking, he spoke about deconstructionism. So we will come back. The next episode will be focused on that. So stay tuned for that. Until then, stay blessed. And I want to just conclude by saying, think about what was shared in this episode. If there is any need for making adjustments in our own lives, please do that, because God ultimately wants us to go in the right direction and not be lost, right? So do that. Once again, since Tim is not here, let me just say this. Thriving Talk is available on all platforms. If you have not subscribed to it, subscribe to it. And I do have a newsletter which goes out now every month. So subscribe to that, where I share a lot of good information. Few editions ago, I shared a link of a article written by Pastor Billy also. So I try to bring things which are relevant and share with people. So do that. So we will be back soon. Until then, God be with you. Once again, thank you, Pastor Billy.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. God bless you all.